Oh my gosh, got him. Got him. On the swim bait. God. Oh, yeah. Oh, that was an awesome bite. I literally saw that fish come out from under that dock and snatch it. I think for most fishermen, it's extremely fun to watch an angler go out there and heave a big swim bait and catch some big bass. I know every time I see this, visions of what I can do at my own body of water always go off in my own head. But when we get to our lake, river, or pond, we struggle sometimes to go out there and get bit on a big swim bait. So today I want to give you 5 tips that will help you to improve your swim bait fishing. So stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This is an app that was made specifically to help fishermen to find strategies and fish on their own bodies of water. Once you download the app, you simply search for the lake that you're going to be fishing. Now, most bodies of water are actually already in the app, but if you can't find your lake, you can simply request it. Now, once you get to the lake that you are fishing, you can import the data that you are seeing real time. So you can put in the current water temperature. You can tell the app whether you're fishing in clean water, stained water, or muddy water. You can also select whether you're fishing in a windy area or a protected area. And you can also select whether that lake has vegetation or not. After you input that data, the app is going to give you some real-time strategies of what you can do to go out there and catch bass. It's a really cool app. It's backed by thousands of different data points from hundreds of different tournaments. And it can really help you locate bass the next time you go out fishing. Now, there is a free version of this app and there's also a paid version. But if you guys want to help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel, click the link down below for the Deep Dive app and download it today. The thing about a swim bait is it's really one of the best tools as an angler that we have to go out there and catch bigger than average fish. Whether you fish tournaments or not, I mean, every angler just wants to go out there and catch a big fish from time to time. But nowadays, with just so many swim baits on the market, I mean, hard baits like glide baits and big soft swim baits like I have here, it can be a little bit overwhelming and it can be a little bit expensive to actually go out there and start catching bass on swim baits. Today, I really just want to simplify things so that you don't have to go out there and spend a lot of money and you can start catching bass on swim baits. So let's dive right into it. Tip number 1 when it comes to fishing a swim bait is you have to learn one swim bait at a time. Not only do you have to learn one swim bait at a time, but I think it's extremely important that you learn the right swim baits first before you start stepping up to some of those really big baits. If you go out there and you're fishing a big glide bait, I mean an 8, 9, 10-inch glide bait all the time, you're simply not going to get a lot of bites, right? You might get 1 bite a day or you might get a couple followers a day. And if you're out there and you're not catching fish on swim baits, it really can be discouraging where then you don't ever get confidence in fishing other swim baits because you chose to start with that really big one that's simply not going to get a lot of bites. So I think it's extremely important that you start with the right types of swim bait and learn that swim bait before you move on to other swim baits. Now, there are 2 swim baits that I'm going to recommend that you start with if you are struggling to fish a swim bait and just want to go out there and catch some fish. And one of these swim baits you probably already own. Now, the other swim bait, this is my baby, right? This is my favorite swim bait of all time. Even though I'm considering this a starter bait, this is still the swim bait that I fish the most out of anyone in my tackle box, and that is the Megabass Mag Draft swim bait. Now, more specifically, I'm gonna recommend that you fish the 6-inch size. Now, when it comes to fishing bigger swim baits, this is probably on the smaller side of a big swim bait, but it will catch a lot of fish. It doesn't just catch big fish. Now, it definitely catches big fish, but it catches a lot of fish. I've caught a lot of 1-pound fish, a lot of 2-pound fish with this bait. And what that does when you're out there and you're just catching fish on swim baits is it starts building your confidence in a bait so that when you make the leap to an 8-inch swim bait or a 10-inch swim bait, it doesn't feel as drastic and you already have that confidence in swim baits to catch fish on them. Now, when I'm talking about a mag draft today, I'm not talking about the freestyle mag drift. I'm talking about the one that already has a built-in harness in the bait. And although this bait is shaped like a shad, I've actually used this quite a few times in ponds before and actually caught quite a few bass in ponds that don't have any shad in them on a mag draft swim bait. Now the next swim bait that I'm going to recommend you might already own, and that is a bigger Kitech style bait, whether it's like a 5.75 inch Kitech or a Rage Tail swimmer. But again, it's a soft plastic swim bait. I'm gonna recommend the soft plastic swim baits up front because I actually get way more bites off a Kitech style bait like this, as opposed to a hard bait that is the exact same size like this S-Waver. Now this is a great bait, but you gotta start with one bait at a time, and that's why I'm gonna say either go mag draft or a Kitech. Now with that Kitech bait, what I typically like to do is actually rig it kind of freestyle, where you actually have the line going through the bait and out the belly attached to a treble hook. To do this, I'm gonna take a coffee stir stick, I'm gonna shove it through the top of that bait and out the bottom. I'm then going to clip each end of that coffee stir stick. I'm gonna add a nail weight in the belly of that bait and then tie on my treble hook. Now another reason that I love that Kitech style bait and that mag draft is you probably already own the rod and reel and line equipment that you need to throw those baits. But that brings me to tip number 2, which is equipment is extremely important when throwing a swim bait. Now one of the big bummers about going out there and buying an 8-inch or a 10-inch glide bait is a lot of times you need kind of a specific swim bait rod and even sometimes a specific swim bait reel to actually go out there and lob that big bait around. Now with the swim baits that I recommended, you probably already own this gear, and that's because I throw those swim baits on my jig rod. Okay, this is a 7-foot 3-inch medium heavy rod. This is actually the Moneymaker rod by Arc Rods. Now I really like that 7-foot 3-inch length, but I think you could throw these baits on kind of anything between 7 foot and 7-foot 6-inch. Whatever you use for a jig or even a Texas rig is probably gonna work just fine for a mag draft or a Kitech bait. Now when it comes to the line, this is something that I see a lot of guys get wrong when it comes to fishing that 6-inch size swim bait, and that is they tend to go a little bit heavier. A lot of guys think 20-pound test is what they need, and I'm gonna let you know right now that 15-pound test is perfect for throwing this 6-inch mag draft. Now, a big reason that you want to use 15-pound line opposed to 20-pound line is that 15-pound line is going to give you a lot more movement in that bait as it's coming through the water. The bigger your pound test is, if you fish 20-pound test or 25-pound test, it's going to restrict the action of that bait. And I like to have a bait that's going to have a lot of action in 15-pound. I'm telling you, that's all you need. Now, the biggest difference between a jig setup and a swim bait setup actually is the reel. With a swim bait, I think it is critical to fish these baits on something that is slower, something in that 6.2 to 1 gear ratio, something in a 6 range. If you go 7 or higher, it's too fast for these baits. And something that's real specific about fishing the mag draft is this bait isn't designed to fish it really, really fast. I mean, even with this 6.2 to 1 gear ratio reel, I'm still going to slow roll this bait because if you reel this bait too fast in the water, it will actually kind of kick up and it will actually kind of roll on its side. And it just doesn't look natural to bass. They're not gonna bite it when it's kind of on its side like that. Now, if you don't have a reel in that 6 gear ratio range, you can throw it on a 7.1 to 1, but you have to crank very, very slow. So just keep that in mind when you're out there, because if you're not getting bit, you tend to reel a lot faster and it's gonna make that bait roll. Now, the third tip when it comes to fishing a swim bait is set your swim bait up for success. The last thing you wanna do is go out there and throw that swim bait around and have a bass come up there and kill it and eat it, but just not get that hook. You know, there's kind of a lot of plastic here and it's easy for a bass to kind of hit that bait sometimes and not get hooked. So there are a few modifications that I do that tend to help me to get more hookups on this bait. Now, the first modification actually comes from Chris Zaldane, and Chris Zaldane was actually the guy that really made the mag draft extremely popular, but there's a few things that I want to tell you about this before you do it. Now, with this modification, what you're going to do is you're going to pull the treble hook off the bottom of the swim bait. You're going to take one of the hooks of the swim bait and you're going to bend it out where it actually looks kind of funny like this. Now the two remaining hooks, you're actually gonna take your pliers and you're actually going to squeeze them together just a little bit, just a hair. Now once you do that, you're gonna stick that funny looking hook up inside the bait, and what that really does is it really keeps that hook inside that bait very, very well. And those two hooks that are kind of hanging down a little bit further on the bottom just help you when it comes to hooking up with fish. Now something that I have learned, if you're gonna be out there and you're gonna be skipping this bait a lot, which that is something that I do a ton with a mag draft. I will skip it underneath docks, underneath overhanging trees. If you're skipping a mag draft a lot, do not do this modification. A lot of times when you skip that bait, especially if you've caught some fish on the mag draft, that hook will actually kind of fall loose from that swim bait as it's skipping up underneath of a dock. Now, because this hook is on a swivel, if you're reeling that bait through the water column and that hook has fallen out and a bass comes up there and eats that bait, there's a chance that they will find that really weird bent out hook. And if they hit that side of the hook, it's not gonna be good. And this actually happened to me in a bigger tournament one time, and this is the reason why I don't do this anymore, because I had skipped this bait up underneath of a dock. The fish hit it. I got the bass all the way to the boat, but the only thing that was actually holding on to the fish was the barb of that really bent out hook. I went down to grab him and he shook free, and I lost that fish right there on the side of the boat. So if you're skipping this bait a lot, do not make that modification. Now, the one thing that I always do to this bait is I'm going to add a little stinger hook to the bait. Now, you could actually make this stinger hook if you wanted, but the one that I use is this Owner stinger hook. It's a number 6 size, which fits perfect with a 6-inch mag draft swim bait. I'm gonna take this stinger, I'm gonna loop it around the line tie of this bait, and I'm gonna take it all the way back to basically this dorsal fin and stick it back in. And what I really want is this stinger to lay perfectly across the top of this bait. There have been days where I've been out fishing where every fish is hooked on that stinger hook. For whatever reason that day, they're just not getting it that well. And I also fished a lake several years ago that every time I caught a largemouth, it was hooked on the stinger hook, and every time I caught a smallmouth, it was hooked on the main hook. So that stinger hook to me is vital for your success at catching more fish that bite a swim bait. Now, when it comes to fishing that Kitech swim bait, I typically don't add a stinger to that. And the reason being is that Kitech style bait is a softer bait. And usually when fish hit that bait, they engulf the whole thing. I'm talking about 1.5 pound fish. They'll eat that entire thing. And so I really don't find it necessary to add a stinger to that Kitech bait. Now, the other thing when it comes to setting your swim bait up for success is actually picking the right day to go out and fish a swim bait. I think a lot of guys, when they're first getting into swim bait, they pick a bad swim bait day and then they don't catch fish on it. They put it down, they never pick it back up again. Now, the biggest thing that I want to have when I'm out there fishing a swim bait is a little bit of wind. I do not want glass calm water. It doesn't have to be a huge gusting wind. It just has to be some sort of chop on the water, and that really helps those bass commit to that bait. Now, there are times when you're fishing really early in the morning or really late in the evening where you could have glass calm conditions and you're still going to catch fish because they're just very active during those times of the day. Now, the other thing is water clarity, and this actually brings me to my 4th tip, and that is clean water is better, but it's not a must. When you're out there swim bait fishing, having clear water, water visibility that is 4 foot or greater, is definitely better when it comes to fishing that swim bait. It's a very visual bait for a bass, and it also has a big drawing power. Something that I love to do is throw that swim bait next to lay down. They will come from 5, 6, 10 foot away out of that lay down to eat that swim bait. It's a very visual bait. Now, with that being said, it is not a must. You don't have to have crystal clear water to catch them on a swim bait. As a matter of fact, I've seen it where if you have, 2 foot of visibility, which I'm going to consider kind of stained water, 2-3 foot of visibility, you can still catch them on a swim bait, and you might have really good days in a little bit stained water. So clear water is great, but it's not always a must. Now, the fifth tip that is going to help you catch a lot more fish on swim baits is simply fishing it. There are so many times when we go out there and we go fishing where we pick up the same baits under the same conditions. You know, you might go out there one day, you're fishing a big flat and it's kind of windy and it's kind of sunny, and a lot of us might think, I'm gonna pick up a spinner bait. Guess what? That's also a perfect time to fish a swim bait. Or maybe you're out on the water and you're fishing a 6-foot flat where there's some scattered grass clumps and you're like, I'm gonna throw a chatterbait and catch them. And you probably will catch them, but that's also another place that you can throw that swim bait. So anytime you are thinking about fishing a spinnerbait or a chatterbait or even a jerkbait at times, pick up that big swim bait instead. Those 3 baits a lot of times can actually be replaced by a bigger swim bait. And yeah, you might not catch as many fish, but sometimes you actually do catch more fish and you catch bigger fish because it's just something different. It's something that not everybody is doing. I really think those 5 tips will greatly help you to catch more bass on a swim bait. If you guys want to see another video where I talked about 5 tips that will help you catch more fish while flipping and pitching, I'm going to leave a link for that video right here. Please subscribe to the channel, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.